Hi everyone, it's Kate from Moonflower Moments. Welcome and welcome back. I really feel like this past week of being off of school has given me the opportunity to really let my creative juices kind of flow and run wild. And so I'm excited to share with you guys a practice that I'm going to integrate into 2026 that I think is going to act as a bit of a through line through the entirety of my practice for the duration of this year. For that reason, I thought it would be appropriate to make this the first video that I post in 2026 because I really am setting the intention by doing a live reading on this video, selecting the decks that I'll be using on this video, that this is something that'll carry through to the heart of my practice in 2026. So the basic premise of this is going to be quite simple. I'm going to pick a word of the year using my Southern Botanic Oracle. And the hope is by choosing this deck that I'll actually come through and get a flower that I'm really familiar with that I use, since this features botanics from the South. So that's the hope. If I end up getting something that I don't really work with, such as hellebore, I don't have that in my garden or anything like that, it might be something for me to actually work with and integrate into my garden. So it's a little bit of a word of the year as well as kind of a plant ally of the year practice. I really like the concept of kind of giving my whole heart and soul and energy into learning what this plant has to teach me. I thrifted this little container. I think it's actually like a Kleenex container, as you can kind of see. I don't know if y'all can see the hole that's in the bottom. So it's just like this little bag. And these are some of my favorite colors in the world, but I'm going to repurpose this and actually keep this next to my windowsill where I read. And I'm just going to fit however many tarot decks and oracle decks that fit the theme I have chosen or kind of remind me of the plant that I've selected into this bag. And this bag is going to sit on my desk and they're going to get priority use throughout the year as I am working with these themes. So that's kind of the basic premise of it. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the camera and actually energetically clear my space. There's a couple of different things that I do before I start readings. I shake a bell to kind of like break up the stagnant energy. And I also kind of imagine myself as a flower and determine kind of what my mental energy is like. If I'm wilted, I'm really not well enough to do the reading. But if I'm in full bloom, which I feel like I am, then through that visualization, I know that I have the green light to go ahead. So I'm going to pause the camera and I'm going to do those two things. And then when I get back, I'll have the deck in my hands and we'll be able to shuffle and see what the keyword is for the year. All right, so now that my regular routines are out of the way, I'm going to pull my card. It is possible that I'll use the keyword that is on the card, or if I happen to know the plant and have my own keyword, I'll use that. It's going to depend on what I select. So I definitely know why this one came up. I am instantly kind of like feeling a gut experience in reaction to this card in particular because this is a viburnum. Over the last few years, my mom and dad have replaced the azalea bushes that were in the front of their yard with viburnums because my mom wanted something that acted as more of like a protected barrier or like a privacy barrier for her yard. And I was like deeply upset that the azaleas that I grew up with were cut down and were instead replaced by viburnum. And like viburnums are, especially the kind that she has, they are native plants, which the azaleas are not. So like it's nice to see a move towards my mom like and dad embracing like the local ecology. And every time I go over there, there are a ton of bees on the viburnums when that wasn't necessarily always the case with the azaleas. They were kind of getting a little old and a little diseased. But to me, I think this is a really beautiful kind of juxtaposition between that childhood and my adulthood. In 2026, I will be turning 30, which to me like didn't feel like a big deal until I realized like yesterday, because my birthday is in July, that I'm getting much closer to 30 than I am 29. And like, I'm not going to be someone that really kind of gets caught up over that. I think there's still quite a lot of life to live. But at the end of the day, I do think that these two cards definitely represent that turning of the point. And it's interesting here too, I didn't pick the azalea like through divination, but I did just go search in the deck to find it that this is a 2 and this is a 1. So it almost seems as part of the maturity process to me is kind of stepping away from the duality and the perspectives of number 2 and kind of leading from that more centered space of I know who I am. Similarly to when I told my mom, I'm like, don't cut the azaleas, I love them. And she was like, that's great, you love them, but this is my house and I really want the viburnums. And I was like, okay, fair, that totally makes sense. My mom is someone who has never been afraid to voice her own opinion. She is Gemini to her core. Her birth decan is 10 of Swords, just like my husband. And so I think I will kind of take a lesson for her in that kind of sense, is that when it's time for a shift to occur, you know, let that shift occur naturally. And don't hang on to that, like the pink innocence of youth, but instead work with what works best for you right now in this particular stage, in this particular moment, and helps you kind of support your goals at that stage in your life. I also feel like with the 10, I'm coming into a lot of sharing my experience. For the longest time, I really have wanted to help people cultivate relationships with their local ecology through tarot. And that is going to be what the core focus of my memberships are, when I'll launch a lot of information about it in February. And then the official launch date will be somewhere mid-February, early March. I really want to sync that up with my 2-year channel anniversary, as well as the beginning of spring. So I think that experience is going to play a lot into it. I also have to speak on terms of maturity. I've pulled a lot of cards recently that have taught me that I'm stepping into more of a listening role, in the sense that my experience does make it to where I can sympathize with other people. But instead of kind of full force giving them like the intensity of my experiences, because I've gone through some shit like everyone has, it's more respectful to kind of step back. And if they want to hear my story, if we want to bond over that story, because that's how a lot of people bond, to share it, but to prioritize other people's stories first when I'm in that mentorship role. So I'm going to pull out the guidebook and I'm going to look at what it says. All right, so here it is if you want to read it for yourself, and I'm going to read it as well. Let's see if I can get the card in there too. Hobblebush, also known as viburnum, is a perennial shrub native to the eastern side of North America. These bushes grow to be about 10 to 12 feet high, with pendulous branches that take root where they touch the ground. These roots stay near the surface and are long and twig-like, forming obstacles which easily trip passerbys, hence the common name hobblebush. Hoodoo practitioners know this plant by a different name, the devil's shoestring. The dried roots of this plant, which look like twigs or wooden ropes, are used in spells to trip up the devil, i.e. to thwart any bad magic aimed at the user. The roots are used for boundary protection as well, to keep the devil from entering a home or business. Your development is reaching a stage of steadiness and reliability, and you are demonstrating to those around you a confidence that makes them feel protected. Outsiders may be hobbled by your reach and power. Accept your changing self and celebrate the value of your life experiences. So from this, I think that I'm going to pull a deck that helps me to establish my boundaries. I feel like that's going to be really important. I'm going to want a deck to kind of embrace the steadiness and the steadfastness of the hobblebush. I'm kind of getting like a lot of pushes in the direction that perhaps King of Pentacles will be really relevant. It's not my official Court of the Year. I haven't pulled one, but I feel like King of Pentacles is the one that I'm taking on, and I think that very nicely fits into the hobblebush concept. So we're looking for decks that illustrate that steadfastness, the steadiness, and I think the King of Pentacles kind of tenacity to do with resources the best he possibly can, and to essentially build empires. I want decks that kind of validate my experience, in the sense that I'm not this like azalea youth anymore, though I think that she knew a lot more than what I gave her credit for when I was this azalea youth. I want things that have validated what I've gone through, and definitely support the goals that I'm trying to put forth as I acknowledge my experience and kind of lead with maturity this year. Okay, so I picked 8 decks, which is going to be too much to fit in my tiny little makeshift bag. So I'm going to start with the one that I know for a fact I'm absolutely sure about, and then we're going to kind of look at the ones where I'm more sure about them, kind of down to the least sure, and kind of decide how they would support this viburnum maturity experience kind of arc on my journey. So the first one I am really kind of excited to share with you. Let's see if I get my viburnum right there. I just opened up the Cantigee Tarot. So this box has never been opened. It still had the plastic wrap. I managed to score this at a local metaphysical shop a few weeks before they permanently closed. And I've been kind of waiting for this deck to call to me, and it's kind of really emotional for me because I think that this is going to be my viburnum deck. So I'm going to grab my scissors. So like I said, this is brand new to me, so it's not quite yet out of order. Everything is still in its original box order. Yep. I definitely feel like this is right. The color tones kind of match what I've been searching for in the viburnum. I know that there are a lot of like yellows in this deck, but kind of these greens and these like grays and some of these darker reds are reminding me what's happening right here in this forest. It's a very classic deck, so I think it speaks to maturity and experience. There's nothing super flashy going on in this deck. It's consistent, it's reliable, it's stable. And I think that this is going to be the main deck in my basket. Look how beautiful. This kind of comes at a perfect time with the Back to Our Tarot roots. I'm not going to be using any of these basket decks until February because currently I am kind of going back to my tarot roots and only playing with the first 5 decks in my collection. But a lot of the people who are doing the Back to Our Tarot roots are people that started with Anna Kay. And so I think this will be very exciting for me to listen to them share their experiences going back and bonding with this original deck for them. And then starting my February off fresh, doing a really deep, intensive dive into this deck and how it is combined with the viburnum for me. Yep. So I definitely saved this for a special moment. And I'm happy to see that this one is going to be the first of my, I guess, viburnum decks. I guess what would be my word of the year? Is it like lived experience? I feel like that definitely fits for Anna Kay. Maybe I have a phrase of the year. I'm going to come back to it at the end of the video. We're going to see what the rest of the decks kind of portray. Next, I'm going to include in my basket for my word of the year, plant of the year, ally of the year, the yearly theme. It's going to be my grandmother deck, which is Herbcrafters. This deck is wholeheartedly very supportive to me, and I think that it perfectly illustrates where I feel like I am the most experienced, which is through my knowledge of plants and the local ecology. When I first got this deck, I actually was kind of big into herb crafting. I was making a lot of like salves with my plants that I was cultivating in my garden. I made like a lot of like mint chapsticks and I gave them away as a gift. I also was making some teas out of the mint in my garden, the echinacea in my garden. And I feel like I'm doing that to a certain extent, but I haven't done it as much in 2025, and I need to kind of be gentle with myself. 2025 was a wreck on my nervous system, and so a lot of my favorite hobbies, which included kind of going back to the soil, paradoxically, those were the things that were exactly what I needed to heal that nervous system, but it was also kind of what I couldn't do because I was in so much of a wreck. So I'm going to be gentle with myself about that experience in 2025 and recognize that the guardians that I have cultivated a relationship with, some of these cards in particular, I have very special relationships with. This used to be my daily draw deck before work. I've worked with some of these cards for literally months on end. And it's such a delight that like if I have ginger upstairs, then I know that like maybe when I'm meal planning for the next week, I can include a meal that has ginger in it. I try to kind of do a little bit of kitchen witchery and along with that. And I think that definitely, lends itself to my experience of working with this. And so wholeheartedly, I think this is a viburnum deck. I'm excited. I don't have a viburnum bush in my yard in particular, but my husband has really been on a big kick about including more bushes and shrubs. So he's going to be really thrilled when I tell him to go ahead and pick up a viburnum from the place where he volunteers, because he's just been really excited about fleshing out the yard with as many shrubs as possible. So Herbcrafters, I think, is going to be the deck that keeps me in that regular routine of touching base with my experience, the way I communicate with the world. So I'm excited to dive into this one more this year with Anna Kay. All right, next is going to be these little cheeky cards. I picked these up at a thrift store, and they're the Stress Less cards. I'm going to flip through these super slowly, so if you're interested in reading what the card has to say, you can. There are no pictures on this deck. It literally is just instructions of how to live a life with less stress. These cards are little gentle reminders of how to live more actively and more presently in your everyday world. And for a really long time, I was actually pulling one of these and leaving it out on my altar on my desk. I really don't have a lot of room for cards though. And so I think what I need to do, I do have like 27 bookshelves in my office. I have like a whole wall of bookshelves. So I think what I need to do is actually clear out space on one of the bookshelves that I can actually see from my tarot desk and actually put all these cards here that I've selected and kind of make it a living, breathing altar to the viburnum, to maturity, to experience, to whatever this card tends to unfold in me and throughout my life. So this will definitely be one of them that I'm completely sure. So far we have Anna Kay, Herbcrafters, and then we have the Namaste Stress Less cards. All right, I have two more that I'm pretty sure of, and then I have three that I'm unsure of, and we're gonna pick one out of the three I'm unsure of. So here's another one that I'm sure of. This is going to be the Ecologies. Oops, I keep calling it the Ecologies. The Cantigee Oracle. The Ecologies is like one of my favorite card games that I play with my husband, but it has nothing to do with divination, though I think that you could use it. I mean, you can use anything for divination. So I'm going to try to hold these up to where we can still see viburnum as well as these cards. So this deck was suggested to me by a subscriber here on YouTube, and I really am so glad that she kind of like prodded me a little bit into getting this deck. She left a couple comments and she was like, you would love this, you would love this, you would love this. And I'm like, oh my God, you are completely right. I wholeheartedly love this deck. And so it was definitely something that when it came into my life, it just kind of swooshed over my heart. This is a perfect deck for establishing relationships with nature. And the cards and the phrases are like a little bit strange. So this one is in the Garden of Lost Teeth. If I'm correct, teeth are one of the things that like really kind of stick around for a while after people have died. So it kind of brings on a system of a lineage to me, but it also kind of brings forth the idea of like what is left when we are dead. It also brings forth the concept that like lost teeth, those could be baby teeth, so we're growing up. So already that kind of like fits the viburnum theme. But one of the ways that I think that I show my experience is through communication, through metaphors. I don't really know how to teach without verbalizing and utilizing like analogies. That's very like Sun and Mercury for me. And so I think that this definitely represents the way that I absorb information as well as the way that I communicate and I teach. And so I'm going to definitely have this along as kind of like a guiding force. These cards do really well in terms of identifying overlying themes that you can work with for an extended period of time. The guidebook is an absolute treasure. There are multiple pages, like each card has like 10 pages in the guidebook where it goes through the variety of ways that this can pop up, like in terms of ecology, in terms of like your everyday use. It gives you guidance on how to live more presently, but also like in alignment with the environment. So overall, this just really matches my natural philosophy. It also has some plants that I have in my garden. So I definitely have like a prickly pear in my garden. I love seeing it here. I just love cacti overall. So it's nice to see a gentle nudge in that direction. Roots grow from your feet. So this was the Cantigee Oracle. Would it be cheating if I take like everything out of its bags and just maybe like wrap a string around each deck so that I can have more in my basket? No, I think the purpose is to like really cultivate like a small selection. So I'm gonna do my best. I'm not gonna get like deck hungry. So the next one is one that I frequently talk about. It recently made it on my top 10 decks of 2025, my standout decks. It also made it out of my top 10 favorite decks ever video. I really like listicles. So this is the Out of Hand Tarot by Jamie Sawyer. So this deck was really important in my journey in terms of becoming more confident in my leadership this year, because I got this deck in early spring, back when I was making a lot of like pretty massive decisions in terms of leadership and stepping into those roles that I've kind of been a little bit more reluctant to step into. And these hands and the cards kind of reminded me that like these are my hands, you know, this is what I'm doing to kind of lead the world in some way, shape, or form. Or rather, more importantly, because I don't want to sound super egotistical, like my little slice of the world. And so this deck definitely affirms my autonomy and reminds me that, you know, the choices that I make have long-lasting consequences, that the ways that I manipulate with the world, you know, I am the world is me. We're both so integrally interconnected, same with my relationships with other people and in community, that I have to take accountability for my actions. And I think that that was a massive part of stepping into that sense of experience for me this year. And so without a doubt, this is going to definitely go into my basket. I like to keep one of these cards at my altar space, and I have a letter that someone really wrote me that was just really beautiful, and they framed it and they signed it for me. And when I'm kind of unsure about the ways that I'm showing up in the world and like what my role is in the world, I pull one of these cards from out of hand and I put it kind of on that letter to kind of remind me of the person that, you know, I hope to be in this world. So out of hand is going to speak to that. All right, now I have the three that of these, I'm only gonna pick one. So I'm actually gonna back the camera up. I'm gonna try to get all of these on screen at once. All right, so the first one I'm contemplating is Tarot of the Cloisters. The next one I'm contemplating is one of my original decks. This I actually will be working with in January because it was one of my first 5, so I'm going to be working with it on my Back to Our Tarot Roots challenge. And then the last one is going to be Mindscapes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Tarot of the Cloisters first. That's this deck over here on the left. So one of the very first conversations that I ever had with my mother-in-law about tarot, she told me that she owned Mother Peace. I do not have Mother Peace, but she had talked to me about how long she had been working with Mother Peace and how much it had supported her in various forms of her life. And she and I had a really beautiful discussion about round decks, because I was telling her that I had the Wild Unknown and the round deck was just like driving me crazy because the cards were everywhere. And so she brought out her Mother Piece and she actually kind of like taught me to see the different ways that the circular decks can be used in terms of reading the positioning as an extra layer into the reading. So even though I don't have Mother Peace, this is a deck that definitely kind of screams like experience to me. And it's closely associated with like her leadership and her support of what I do in the tarot sphere. Every time like I call her, she asks me like what's going on with like Moonflower Moments, which is not really something that I can say in terms of like my blood family. You know, I do live in the South, so there is that stigma, but my mother-in-law has always been like very open-minded. She is definitely one of the OG like new age people. And so this deck really reminds me a lot of her in that capacity and the wisdom that she's kind of given to me as I've kind of started out reading tarot. Now, Goddess Tarot, which is in the middle, was one of my very first decks. So to me, it kind of feels like my own personal journey through my own experience. And this deck is definitely a reminder of the ways that I have grown as a tarot reader. I used to do a lot of predictive readings with it. Now I'm not really necessarily one for predictive readings. It just doesn't like strike my fancy the way that it used to. But that being said, that's still like part of my experience. Like I had to go through life to realize that predictive readings made me anxious, because I never did them when I was feeling well. I always did them as kind of like a tool to self-soothe. And that's kind of when I realized that those types of predictive readings, maybe not all predictive readings, are bad for me, but those types definitely are. And so I see this as an integral part of my tarot history. This is the deck that was kind of like my RWS when I was starting to learn how to read. I also really deeply appreciate that it's a goddess tarot. Though I don't work with goddesses or deities, it is nice to add that extra layer in terms of experience. Now, as far as it goes with the Mindscapes Tarot, I think that this kind of speaks to where I am right now in my practice, which then in itself also kind of shows that level of experience of I really have been specializing a lot with landscape decks. So that's one of the reasons that I grabbed this, because I feel like now that I've kind of known that I'm a landscape deck specialist, that's what I'm going to call myself, that decks like this can't really be separated away from my practice. And I think I just convinced myself to use all of these. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I am never going to be upset with keeping Mindscapes Tarot out on my desk all year, but this deck really kind of is the one that I feel like is the core of my practice. So like, I'm probably going to reach for this deck no matter what. You know, do I want it to be associated with that keyword of experience for me? Or is that something that I want to keep separate for more like kind of all-purpose readings? This is really pretty together. Honestly, this kind of reading feels like my contemplation right now. So maybe Mindscapes Tarot is the one that I keep to the side. Though Mindscapes decks and like landscape decks are different from like my Herbcrafter Tarot, which is more plant-based, I use them in a different way. I think that I'll probably be reaching for this one enough to where it will probably get enough use in 2026. So I think for the sake of my real estate and making sure that I cultivate kind of like a really tight-knit basket that I bond very deeply with this year, I think I'm going to kick Mindscapes out of the running, but I'm going to keep this one to represent my personal history with tarot, and Tarot of the Cloisters to represent essentially the support that I've gotten from the women in my life who just really have taught me about tarot and about kind of embracing spirituality in general. So, okay, so I'm going to kick this one out for this purpose. This deck hasn't left my desk since I bought it. Like I'm loving Mindscapes right now. So it'll be no love lost. It just won't go in that basket. It'll probably just be on my desk shelves or something. Alrighty, so I really kind of like the decks that I've just picked out right now. Not even kind of, I'm actually really excited for this practice. I'm definitely gonna have to take some of them out of their packaging and out of their bags, maneuver it around a little bit so all 7 fit. 7 is my favorite number, so I'm excited. I feel like that's the right amount that I need to have anyway. It's going to be especially exciting kind of getting to use Anna Kay too, because like immediately when I pulled this card, I was like, oh, it's time to open her up and break her in. So it seems like this year is going to be a pretty big one in terms of growth for me. I've traditionally had a lot of issues with projecting my voice, making sure that it's like, I don't know, accessible, I guess. I've had a hard time like just speaking my mind and speaking my thoughts. And I've toned down a lot of what I've said my entire life to make it palatable for my audience members, not like just here on YouTube, but like in general, any person that I talk to, I kind of tend to tone down to become more palatable. And I think definitely, especially with the Hobblebush kind of staking claim and spreading so easily through its branches, I think this is definitely kind of a message to me that, you know, I'm allowed to take up space. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this year goes. I have plans. I'm looking at a shelf right now to where I can build an altar out for this card. Definitely am going to try to collect some viburnum from my parents. Other than those viburnum bushes, because I know it's like a whole like section, there's a lot of different viburnums. Other than like the ones in my parents' yard, I don't know if I know how to identify any of them. So I guess it's the first thing that I'm going to do is learn more about this plant. Maybe by the end of the year, I'll have one in my yard. My husband's mentioned it a couple of different times, and I'm just going to kind of lean into this concept of viburnum and also the keyword experience. So I want to go ahead and thank y'all so much for being here. A massive part of me being able to utilize my voice is this space. I know I say it in almost every single video. I hope it still comes off as genuine, even though I keep repeating it. But I end every single video kind of in a bit of like a high from this concept that like I'm very excited that I get to share this space with you. So I really am very grateful for you guys being here, and I will see y'all again next time.